Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, unamulwanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Tell your kids' teachers, their librarians, their principal, and please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Audible, Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, Ghana, Himalaya, wherever you find your podcasts. Well, I know this is going to be a great episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast because our guest and I just had a fantastic 15, 20-minute conversation before we started recording. Join us right now from Michigan. She's here to celebrate her debut YA novel. It's called Once a Queen. Please welcome to the show, Sarah, author. Hey, Sarah, how are you?
Hello, so glad to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
I'm delighted to have you on. This is, Once a Queen is your debut fiction YA novel, but you've been writing a whole lot. There are a lot of books out there by Sarah Author.
There are. This would be, actually this fall is my 20th sort of anniversary of when I published my first book. Came out right around, dates me right around when The Lord of the Rings were in theaters, and I wrote a book for teenagers based on my experience in youth ministry and my love of literature called Walking with Frodo, a devotional journey through The Lord of the Rings. So that just took off because people were hungry for conversations about the intersection of great stories and faith. And so we were off and running, and that's what I've been doing.
Yeah. You know, I definitely want to dive into finding out what Once a Queen is all about, but I just wanted to mention one of the things we talk about here on the podcast is the importance for parents to experience media with our kids, to help our kids become media literate, and also to use, as you did with your book, to use pop culture, to use what kids are out there to talk about our faith, not to bang them over the head with the faith. And because we know if we sit down, if we have some values that we want to instill in our kids, if we sit down and lecture them, it's just going in one ear and out the other. It's really useless. However, if we can sit down and have conversations with them about the real world and how our visions and our values, how they help us navigate the world, and we think this might help you, having those conversations, it's a lot more powerful and a lot more effective. Kids might not agree with you, but at least you've shown your kids that you respect them. And you expect that they're going to be, that they're human beings that are going to make their own decisions.
Yeah. Well, it began in youth ministry for me. I mean, I was a youth director of a large Methodist congregation in northern Michigan, working with teenagers and realizing that a lot of the time our job as adults in their lives, whether it's parents or teachers, educators, religious educators, is to invite them into a story that began long before we got here and will continue long after they're gone, and that they have a part to play, that they are invited into this story. And rather than foreclose on what that story means, whether it's through scripture or other stories, we have the opportunity. The imagination is a beautiful gift that we can nourish, that teaches us what to love and how to love the right things, or the things that we as families and as educators know are part of the good life. And so that really was, I did a lot of book groups with my students. We would read The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis, or my confirmation classes, the training in preparation for reaffirming their baptisms. We always started with a work of literature, and then I would ask them questions like, what do you notice? And what do you wonder? What does this remind you of? And then we would get to scripture and some of the other things. And I found the stories to be much more invitational than prescriptive. And for whatever, and I had to learn how to allow the Holy Spirit, in my Methodist tradition, the Holy Spirit's a big part of that, to work through the back door of the imagination, right? Because often, especially skeptical teens have what C.S. Lewis called these watchful dragons, guarding the front doors of their lives. And they're really skeptical about people telling them what to do through that front door of the intellect and the will. But if you sneak in the back door through the imagination, before they know it, the meaning of a story or an experience is sitting down at the table with them. And it's like, well, here I am. And what are you going to do with me now? So I've been writing about that for 20 years. I now have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old of my own. And I realized, like, if I'm going to be nurturing the imagination, what better way to do that than to make the turn towards writing stories myself?
Yeah. Well, I love that. And I love the idea that ultimately our faith, whatever faith it is, of the faith
or a system of values.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's all about joining a story, and that story is spreading love. And that's going to take generations and generations for that story to reach all corners of the earth. And I love that. So let's talk about, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, a lot of it, I'm not inventing any of this. When I was writing, I wrote Walking with Frodo and then followed that with Walking with Bilbo on The Hobbit, and then did one on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And as I was reading these authors, I would read their letters and their other essays and writings. And, all of them had this deep respect for this formative nature of narrative, the formative nature of the imagination, that it's not tools that we're wielding as weapons. They are spaces that we're invited into. And that, reading Flannery O'Connor's Mystery and Manners, or Madeleine L'Engle's Walking on Water, about faith and art. Like, this is a lost kind of talent or skill or something in our culture, and too much we wield it to proselytize or to already prescribe to kids what 3 points they need to get out of a story, instead of welcoming them in. And so I was learning really from kind of the masters of this craft who were themselves people of faith.
Yeah.
And their stories were ways that they weren't just trying to deliver a message, but it was for them an act of worship. It was a way to say, here's what I'm creating for the life of the world.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I love that. And I love that you are showing us through your example of sitting down and the value of reading with our older kids, reading with our teens, whether it's reading aloud with them or sitting down and co-reading with them and having conversations about them. Tell us about Once a Queen. What kind of conversations can we have with our kids if we're co-reading Once a Queen with them?
Oh my goodness. Well, what's fun is this book has been a dream of mine for a long time. I tend to have my best ideas when I'm supposed to be doing something else. I had a deadline for one of my other nonfiction books. And of course, this is when the idea for Once a Queen came to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, wouldn't this be cool if there was an American teenage girl who had never met her British grandmother before, and she doesn't know why there's this estrangement, but for whatever reason, she and her mother, the grandmother's only child, and she herself is an only child, end up in Great Britain at her grandmother's estate, and she begins to sense that all the fairy tales that she herself as a teen have loved as a child might actually be true, and that her grandmother might be connected to those stories somehow. And so, stories about other worlds and stories about children who traveled to other worlds and came back changed, nobler, and I was like, oh, this is so great. And I have this other deadline, dang it. So I sketched out some ideas and just would return to it periodically. And then over the last few years, finally got my hands into it to finish it, in part because now I had kids of my own. And I wanted them to hear my story. And so as I was reading it aloud with them, during COVID, actually, oh, their questions are so wonderful. It was so wonderful. Like, what happened to the grandmother? Why won't she believe anymore? Why doesn't she want to talk about these stories? Why doesn't she want to acknowledge that she had these wonderful adventures in another world? What happened? What is the brokenness in this family? Mommy, come on, tell us the secret. And I was like, well, you have to keep reading. I can't tell you the secret all at once. So it was a beautiful experience to watch the story unfold for them, because I knew what was going to happen, but they didn't. And to realize that they cared not just about the main character, but they were really worried about this grandmother, who in a lot of ways is a lot of the adults that kids know, who have been broken by something, and they don't know what, and they don't know why, and they internalize that sense of distance, and they hurt for the adults in their lives, and they don't know how to fix it.
Wow. Very powerful. I love that image of you and your kids, and the kids asking questions, asking difficult questions. And I think as I'm thinking back to when my kids, especially my daughter, was 13, we experienced a lot of media together, and she would come out on tour with me, and we would spend 3 weeks traveling around the country in my van. So that meant we were spending hours and hours in the van and in hotels and whatnot. And she asked a lot of uncomfortable questions. And instead of just kind of shutting her down, I went with it, and we had these incredible conversations. I'm wondering, do you think maybe we've gotten away from those conversations, because we have all this media, and it's like, those conversations make us uncomfortable. We don't have to have them right now. Our kids can watch TV, and I can watch something else, and we don't have to be vulnerable like that in front of our kids.
Yeah, I think you've really hit on it, is the vulnerability, because as parents, we instinctively know that our confidence in navigating the world, or our posture, looking like we have confidence in navigating the world, allows our children to feel safer in a lot of ways. And so it's not fake, because we are adults, and we are, capable adults navigating the world. And we want to provide that sense of safety for them. But it's also okay, especially around how we feel and our emotions, to say, I'm having a hard day today, or I'm struggling with something. When they're old enough to bear it, right, to carry it with us. I kind of think about, like, when my sons were little, trying to hold a gallon of milk to pour it into their cereal was just like, so it's awful to watch a kid try to do that, because it's going to happen. And so you have to say, you're not old and you're not big enough yet to carry that. Let me do that for you. Well, eventually they have to be able to hold the gallon and pour it themselves. And so there's the same is true with the difficult things, that we're trying to help them navigate, that we ourselves are struggling to navigate. But I think youth ministry really taught me, and I was 22 when I started in youth ministry. So I'd recently been a teenager. So I think the kids opened up to me in ways that they maybe wouldn't have, if I hadn't been who I was in that space and that age. Maybe, I don't know. But it was interesting. So one of the things that we still do this with our children, my husband and I, and we do this in our children's ministry at our church. What is something that made you happy today, or happy this week? And then we thank God for that. And then what is something that made you sad or upset this week? And then we ask God to be with us in those things. It's the prayer of examine from Ignatius, but at a children's level. Mm-hmm. And I instinctively did this in youth ministry too, in my 20s, without knowing anything about St. Ignatius, in a Methodist church. And almost 100% of the time, these teen girls, sitting on the floor with me, in the lounge would say, well, my high this week was that I made it on the, debate team. But my real high, there was always that was great. But then my real high is I got to spend time with my mom. And then my low this week is my friends are really mean to me. But my real low is that my mom and I had a big fight. Right. So there was like these kind of levels of school and life out there in the world that were the highs and lows. But then the really deep and difficult stuff, but also the really high and wonderful stuff, were the family relationships. As they awake to the brokenness of the adults around them, they really start to bear a lot when the adults are not open about what's happening with them emotionally and everything, without expecting them to bear too much of that. And so I think for, 25 plus years, that's been my posture in interacting with students and my own kids now.
Hey, I hope this isn't an off-roading experience that leads us nowhere, but use the word brokenness. And that's something in our Christian traditions, a lot of folks, and it's not a negative. It's acknowledging that we're not perfect, that we've had trauma, we've experienced pain, and that's damaged us. But that's okay, because through our faith, through each other, we can heal. I love that. One of the things that I see a lot on social media is, and I have experienced this before social media, is, well, I'm this way, and that's okay. It doesn't matter. I don't have to change. And it's just kind of like, wow, you're acknowledging that there's something that you do that is painful to you. It's annoying to others, but it's painful. It's ultimately painful to you. But instead of sitting down saying, and I can make it better, it's just like, that's the way I am, and I don't have to deal with it, and just accept me. And I, on one hand, I want to be like the cool kids and say, yes, well, that's you, and we'll just accept you for who you are. But on the other hand, it's kind of like, we can all get better, especially if we acknowledge there's something we're not crazy about ourselves.
Yeah. It's such a challenge, because on the one hand, we want to be honest, and I do think that vulnerability kind of leads to vulnerability, right? When we are open about our struggles, then other people don't feel so alone, and there's, but I also think that if this is it, then like, what is Jesus for? And that's just me, that's just me coming out of a person of faith, but like, or any value system that says we can be better people and this world can be a better place. Like, what is the trail of broken relationships and hurt people behind the narrative of that person's posture on Instagram or wherever? Because it is a persona, right? That whether it's the beautiful Instagram persona of like, look at my fantastic house. I mean, I have, even on a podcast where I know no one is going to see this video, I'm sitting here with like my beautiful bookshelf behind me so that you don't have to see my laundry over there. And my mess of Christmas supplies and crap. So like, there is a kind of posture of like brokenness as a brand. And that's not what this is about. Kids are going to know we're broken. And because they're in our lives, they're not going to buy the brand. They are the man behind the curtain. They see that something's going on. And so we can't fool them. And we have the opportunity to be real about how we can't do this on our own. I mean, that is the whole point of the Christian faith, is that we are, first of all, we're not alone, thank God. But also we can't save ourselves. I mean, that's, we can't. And as parents, we can't save our kids either. They need to know to rely on a power outside of themselves, or they're going to end up in the same mess as everyone they see on TikTok.
Yeah. I really love this conversation that we're having because I'm hoping a couple of things. First, you're like an expert. You were there with the teens. You were in the trenches as a youth minister for years, spending time with these creatures that so many people are terrified of, teenagers, and even more terrifying, middle school kids.
I'm a middle school substitute teacher right now.
Oh my goodness. So you have a suit of armor on with that dirty laundry that's not on camera here.
It just means I haven't had time to do it because dealing with kids.
But I mean, one of the things that you brought out is, talking about the highs and lows. Mm-hmm. So many parents out there like, oh, my kid hates me. It's like, no, you teenager, even though they have very choice words about you, and most of the conversations you're having these days are screamed at each other, you're still your kid's most important person. You are the most important person in your kid's life, and they value you. They value your opinion, and I'm really happy that you reminded us of that, because it's hard. It's hard to accept the fact that, yeah, this kid still needs me when they're screaming at me, calling me all sorts of names, and stomping out of the house and slamming the door. But it's important that we remember that, because we have to hang in there for them.
Yeah. Well, and we are the safest person for them to fall apart around. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's Jen Hatmaker who talks about, like, part of the challenge is, they're on this roller coaster as their bodies are changing, and their, hormones are, everything's a mess. The prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. And so they don't have that filter. They don't have that direction. And they want you to come on the roller coaster with them. But we have to do our best to stay on the platform and just be like, okay, that roller coaster is going to happen. We'll see you later. I'll be here when the ride is over. And so, but the challenge is, to not just like jump in the roller coaster with them and be like, that's right, let's keep screaming. So, and there are days that I do because, oh my gosh, but thankfully, and I'm not sure why this is, in my house, it's just a lot of eye rolling and like, I don't want to do that. So thankfully we don't have this scream fest. It could happen. It probably will. But to honor their full humanity is to honor the range of emotions that they feel, and to not let that define who they are, mm-hmm. and to let them know that it doesn't define who they are. Yeah, it's a challenge. And I think, as I'm writing, just to kind of circle back to Once a Queen for a moment, because it's in first person from the point of view of a 14-year-old girl. And the challenge with middle grade versus young adult fiction, any kind of writing for that age, is middle grade is really kind of 8 to 12 years old. It's a very kind of small window. And then young adult is, now we're getting into like the Hunger Games and very grown-up themes for kids. They're dealing with sexuality and gender and, really tough issues, and experimenting with stuff that's maybe not healthy for them. And as a genre, not just an age-based resource, it can really push beyond where some kids are ready, or even where parents are ready for them to go. So you have this middle space. Kids are maybe 12, 13 to 15-ish, 16-ish, where they're beginning to make the turn towards adulthood. They're really in the middle of like all of the adolescent changes. They're still wanting to be kids in a lot of ways, but they're not ready for adult responsibilities. And not all of them are super interested in experimenting. That's something that's kind of a lie of our culture, that mm-hmm. that's inevitably what kids are going to be doing. But a lot of the stuff they experiment with is not invented by kids. It's invented by adults, and it's just made available to them. So it's like we have this middle space, kind of like young teen. And for me to inhabit that space, I had to try to remember what it was like to be 14. And to be this like roller coaster of emotions, but also that's not inevitable. Like, there are times when my protagonist is kind of level-headed and is aware that things are not right with her grandmother. Things are not right between her mom and her grandmother. And how is she going to be present to them? And not internalize all of that and think that it's all her fault, or there's something, she's done that makes it worse. She doesn't make all the right decisions, and she's all over the place emotionally, but I needed to give her the dignity of being human and not just an adolescent trope.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I think that Once a Queen is, it sounds like an amazing book that families will really, not only kids, but families get a lot out of. And I think, I hope so. Yeah, I think folks should give yourself an extra present this holiday season and grab yourself a copy of Once a Queen with the intention of co-reading it with your kids, and then having those conversations, those really meaningful, maybe difficult, but ultimately very rewarding conversations with our kids. Sarah, this has been an awesome conversation that I don't want to end, but I have other interviews to do today. Where can people go to find out more about Once a Queen and find out more about you?
Yeah, well, SarahArthur.com. That's Sarah with an H. They can start there. And from there, there's lots of resources out there. I have a bookshop page. I'm with an imprint of Penguin Random House, so there's information there. I am on TikTok and Instagram as @HolyDreaming.
Wonderful. We've had a really fun and powerful time speaking with the author of Once a Queen. It is the debut YA novel from our guest, Sarah Arthur. Sarah, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, it was wonderful. So glad to be here.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. We are so grateful that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. We'd love for you to connect with us on social media, Facebook.com/Reading with Your Kids, @Reading with Your Kids on Instagram, @JedleyMagic on Twitter. If you are on LinkedIn, please connect with Jed Doherty. We also have a Reading with Your Kids page on LinkedIn. We would love for you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Authors, click on the Authors Click Here button to find out how you can be a guest here on the show, and find out how we can help you celebrate your book with the world. And also, parents, please be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com to download our free online magazine. Hey, we want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our amazing guest. I also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Chris Doherty, Ann O'Leary, Soji Franklin. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.